There's something interesting happening with the mainstream media. The mainstream media has been hiring ex-intelligence officials left and right to join their news organizations, and they all have a few things in common. A strong distaste for Trump, a desire to push the US into a conflict with Russia, and a strong tendency to lie to the American people.
It's horrifying. So what you're watching is agencies of the US government turning their awesome and unconstrained powers against the American population.
This is the real story of the last 4 years of the Trump administration, which is that for a long time on the left, there was a healthy skepticism of the CIA.
Yes, there was.
There was a lot of anti-war activism in the Bush and Cheney years. That has all disappeared. And the reason it's disappeared is because the CIA, from the very first days of the Trump administration, even before he was inaugurated, devoted themselves to sabotaging the administration because Donald Trump questioned just a few of their pieties. And that can't be done in Washington. Whoever does that must be destroyed.
But he's taking these shots, this antagonism, this taunting to the intelligence community.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
Trump decided to shine a light on the acts of the intelligence community in spite of Chuck Schumer's warning, and as a consequence, the news agencies, in cooperation with the CIA, gave birth to a new conspiracy, the Russian Collusion.
There is significant evidence, much of it in the public domain, on the issue of collusion. His mission was not to find out what Russia did, not to determine the role of U.S. persons, but rather to endeavor to distract the public, to put the government on trial.
As long as the Russians interfere on Donald Trump's side in the midterms, Vladimir Putin can count on the president to never call him out.
Right, let's call you out, Mr. Schiff.
You're on the Intel Committee. Let me just ask you one final question. Can you look right into the camera and say, I know for a fact the government of Vladimir Putin was behind the hacks of John Podesta's email?
Absolutely. The government of Vladimir Putin was behind the hacks of our institution and the dumping of information.
Of John Podesta's email?
Not only in the United States, but also in Europe.
Okay, you're not, you know what, you're dodging.
And Tucker,
no, look and say, I know they did. John Podesta's emails, they hacked those.
And I think that Ronald Reagan will be rolling over his grave at your carrying water for the Kremlin.
I'm not carrying water for the Kremlin. You're a sitting member of Congress on the Intel Committee, and you can't say they hacked.
You're gonna have to move your show to RT Russian television because
you know what?
This
That's
is perfect.
Just so
this is perfectly
beneath your
placed.
office because it's so dumb and you're being duplicitous. I'm asking you, did they hack Podesta's emails? And you can't say it.
Personal insults like that, Tucker.
You just said I was carrying. Oh, you said I was carrying water for Putin. That's pretty hilarious.
You know, when you essentially are an apologist for the Kremlin, that's what you're doing.
I'm going to one last time, Congressman. Look into the camera and say they hacked John Podesta's emails. We know for a fact that Putin's government did that. You can't, and you know you can't, and you're hiding behind weasel words.
Can you agree that there has been no evidence of collusion, coordination, or conspiracy that has been presented thus far between the Trump campaign and Russia?
Bob Mueller will have to determine that, but of course,
right,
the entire meeting at Trump Tower...
you acknowledge that the FBI has not presented it thus far?
But the propaganda wasn't working on the American people, and so the bigger guns were brought in. They too, however, were proven wrong.
Do you think this is vindication?
It is. I mean, the FBI's had to wait 2 years while the president and his followers lied about the institution. Finally, the truth gets told. I hope it's not too late, but on all the important things, it tells the truth. They don't want to talk about what we just talked about, that the report is a complete vindication for the FBI.
Comey's admissions come just days after the Inspector General, that's Michael Horowitz, stated in his report that there were significant errors and omissions by the FBI's investigation team when it applied for a FISA warrant to monitor Trump's former campaign advisor, Carter Page.
He's right, I was wrong. I was overconfident in the procedures that the FBI and Justice had built over 20 years. I'm responsible for that. That's why I'm telling you, I was wrong. I was overconfident as director in our procedures.
Unfortunately, I think Donald Trump too often has helped to incite some of these feelings of anger, if not violence. I'm hoping that this is going to make it clear to him that what he has done heretofore, as far as a lot of this rhetoric, really is counterproductive. It is un-American.
Un-American to doubt the findings of the secret intelligence community? How is this for un-American?
John Brennan was confirmed to be the next head of the CIA. Reignited debate, of course, about the use of drones.
3 months after 42 civilians died, John Brennan stood up and said,
"There hasn't been a single collateral death."
As far as the allegations of CIA hacking into Senate computers, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, we wouldn't do that. If I did something wrong, I will go to the president, and he is the one who can ask me to stay or to go.
Did evidence exist of collusion, coordination, conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russian state actors at the time you learned of 2016 efforts?
I don't know whether or not such collusion, that's your term, such collusion existed. I don't know.
The people yelling the loudest about how the Russians are our greatest enemy and Trump is their puppet happen to be the very same people who have been mismanaging our foreign policy for the past 2 decades. The people who invaded Iraq and wouldn't admit it was a mistake. The people who killed Muammar Gaddafi for no obvious reason and prolonged the horrible Syrian civil war and then threw open the borders of Europe. The ones still defending the pointless Afghan conflict and even now planning brand new disasters around the world in Lebanon, Iran, and yes, in Russia. These are the people who've made America weaker and poorer and sadder. The group whose failures got Trump elected in the first place. You would think by this late date they would be discredited completely and unemployable, wearing uniforms and picking up trash by the side of a turnpike somewhere. But no, they're not. They're hosting cable news shows. They're holding high positions of influence at the State Department. They run virtually every nonprofit public policy institution in Washington. They are still, in some sense, in charge of our national conversation. And naturally, they hate the idea of rethinking or correcting any of the countless blunders they have made over the years. And that's one of the main reasons they hate Trump, because he calls them on those blunders. But on the big questions, Trump is indisputably right. The Cold War is over. The world has changed. It is time to rethink America's alliances and to act in our own interest for once.
For 2 years, they said Trump worked for, I've heard of political mudslinging my whole life. For 2 years, they said Trump was an agent of Russia. He was an asset of Russia. The president. Then they did a whole report, and then it came out that he wasn't. There was no proof of it. With the CIA, the NSA, everybody. And then they went like this. They went, well, we might have been wrong about that. I mean, it's mind-blowing.
One of the most disturbing things to me was when Ted Cruz was cross-examining Comey, when he was asking him questions about what they did with evidence and how they doctored evidence.
But what we have seen over the past 3 years is a group of individuals from the FBI, from the CIA, who are leaking pieces of information to kneecap a duly elected president so that they can put the people in power that they choose. It's incredibly frightening that we now have a handful of entities from Silicon Valley that are really publishers deciding who gets to say whatever they want them to say. And if it goes too far, we're going to stop you from tweeting or stop you from sharing something on Facebook. That's what they're doing now. That's what they've done to me.
And so the CIA and the deep state operatives became heroes of the liberal left, the people who support the Democratic Party. They're now in a full union with the neocons, the Bush-Cheney operatives, the CIA, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street. That is the union of power, along with mainstream media outlets that are fully behind the Democratic Party, which is likely to at least take over one branch of government, if not all of them, in the coming election. And that is a very alarming proposition because they're authoritarian, they believe in censorship, and they believe in suppression of information that exposes them in any kind of a critical light.
For a U.S. government agency to try and disseminate propaganda within the United States, I mean, is there any clearer attack on democracy than that?
So when we were doing the Snowden reporting, one of the things that induced Edward Snowden to come forward as someone who had worked in the CIA and the NSA was his anger and horror that the tools of the NSA had been turned on the American people. They're supposed to spy on foreign adversary governments, but they weren't. They were collecting our phone records. Same with the CIA. They're trained disinformation agents. That's what they do. They lie for a living. But they're supposed to do that in other countries where we want to induce some sort of change, overthrow a government, topple a regime, whatever quote-unquote interference the U.S. government wants to do, the way we're also upset that Russia did in 2016. That's what they're trained to do. The law, though, and the obvious foundational prohibition on having a security state, a national security state after World War II, was it was never supposed to be turned domestically. They weren't supposed to be involved in our politics or disseminating propaganda. Go turn on any of those other cable networks or pick up the op-ed page of any of the biggest newspapers, and all you'll see are ex-members of the CIA, the DOJ, the FBI, the NSA telling Americans what they ought to believe. They've infiltrated the means of communication domestically. They do it through leaks, they do it through clandestine operations, and through lies. They propagandize the American people in a way that is incredibly dangerous no matter what your ideology is.
Trump, Putin, Russian collusion.
Trump, Russian sort of collusion.
Trump, Russian, possible collusion. Trump, Russian, metal collusion. Trump, Russia, possible collusion.
Trump, Russian, potentially collusion.
Trump, Russia, possible collusion.
Trump, Russian, possible collusion.
Trump, Russian, collusion. Trump, Russia, Russian collusion. Trump, Russia, possible collusion. Russian hacked our election. Here comes a big change. Because all of a sudden, Trump, Russian, possible collusion, Russian collusion.
Trump, Russia, possible collusion.
Trump, Russian, possible collusion. Trump, the Russians, collusion.
Collusion with the Russians. Trump, Russia, possible collusion. Trump, Russia, possible collusion. Prove collusion. Prove collusion.
Was there collusion?
Absolutely.